There's quite a bit on everybody's mind as we go to this morning's caucus, starting with the potential of a shutdown. The President has continued to reach out to the other side. As you've heard Mr. Van Hollen say on more than one occasion, the Democrats have stepped up to the forefront, initially with $41 billion, and now, in conjunction with the President, even more. I have said repeatedly coming out before here and talking to you that the issue has not been about dealing with a deficit. That is the veneer. The issue for the Republicans, whether it's in Wisconsin, where they want to end collective bargaining, or whether it's here in Washington, D.C., where they want to shrink up government so small they can drown it in a bathtub. Those are the words of Grover Norquist. That is the call of this party. They, led by the Tea Party, are convinced that this is their prime objective. They do not like government. But as I speak, we have men and women in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have support members of our service off the coast of Africa. Our people are in harm's way. It is unprecedented in the history of the country when the nation is at war that one political party would threaten to shut down the government and all the ramifications that occur from that. Look, we have said this repeatedly. Everybody recognizes that we want to deal with the deficit. It is a manageable crisis. This is not a problem. It's manageable. And we all are prepared to step up to the plate. But that is not the agenda here. The agenda here is to shrink up government so small. And who are they shrinking? They're shrinking the elderly, causing unbelievable problems, ending Medicare as we know it. And it's the camel with the nose under the tent with respect to Social Security, another objective tried by the Bush administration, but is just around the corner here with more promises of that, and the impact on Medicaid. Americans want to see a nation that works together, but fundamentally, they want to see something that's fair to them. They recognize the problems that we face, but they want a doctrine of fairness. They want to know that the proposals that are emanating are fair. And how can you put a proposal on the table that only seeks to balance the budget on the backs of the elderly, on the backs of kids that will be losing their Pell Grants, on the backs of veterans who will lose their benefits? This is unconscionable at a time of unprecedented wealth in this nation. It is near a gilded age in this country, but sacrosanct to the Republican Party is not wanting to tax 1% of this nation who have made extraordinarily well during this time, while we're finding the middle class in an incredible squeeze from both sides. This is a time for the nation to come together, and what do we get but gamesmanship on the other side, while our troops are at war, while we're in the midst of a recession, while we're going through a very delicate recovery. This is what we get from the Republicans. Americans want fairness. That's what Chris Van Hollen has set out to do. That's what the Democratic caucus will set out to do, to provide fairness to the American people by way of a budget that they can live with, but by also providing for us the basics that people need to survive, a fundamental social contract around Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and making sure that we're providing the kinds of jobs that Americans can gain a living from, support their families, look across the table from their spouse and let them know that they've made it and that they're providing for them. That's what our party has stood for. Let me turn it over to Chris Van Hollen, who's done an incredible job.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, John, for your incredible leadership and for your passion on these very important issues. Let me first say a word about the possibility of a government shutdown. We know what's happening here on Capitol Hill, and that is that the Tea Party wing of the House Republican Party is driving the train because the reality is that Speaker Boehner proposed some time ago as part of the official Republican proposal to cut an additional $32 billion. The President of the United States has said, well, we'll do $33 billion. But what happened, of course, is pushed by the Tea Party element of his caucus, they've moved the goalpost. Not only that, but they have demanded that whatever cuts be made their way. As the chairman was saying, if the real interest is in reducing the deficit, it shouldn't matter whether you are cutting $1 out of education, which is what they want to do, or whether you're cutting $1 from the big taxpayer subsidies that are going to the oil companies, which is what we want to do, because prices at the pump are going through the roof. Profits of the oil companies are an all-time high. They don't need taxpayer giveaways. And yet what the Republicans in the House are saying, not only do we want to cut, but we want to cut education. We want to cut cancer research at NIH instead of getting rid of the subsidies for the big oil companies. And what we're seeing now with respect to a small slice of the budget is a microcosm of what we're about to go into with the big budget. Today, in the Budget Committee, we will have a markup, amendments on the Republican budget proposal. Now, let me make it clear. Democrats will measure the merits of any proposal by three things. Number one, does it help grow the fragile economy, or does it stall it? Does it help put more people back to work, or does it slow job growth? And third, does it reduce the deficit in a sustainable way consistent with American values and priorities? And on all three of those counts, the Republican proposal that was unveiled yesterday fails. It makes the wrong choices for America. Yes, we need to reduce the deficit, but how we do it is important. And they choose to keep in place tax breaks for the very highest income earners in the country while they cut education for our kids, while they cut research into finding cures and treatments to diseases, while they cut very important investments in infrastructure, our roads and bridges and our crumbling infrastructure. That's the choice they make. And they would keep in place the big subsidies for the oil companies. They would keep in place provisions in the tax code that reward companies that ship American jobs overseas instead of ship manufactured American goods overseas. Those are the choices they make. And we think those are the wrong choices for America. We believe, yes, you've got to make some significant cuts going forward, but you also need to deal with the other side of the equation and get rid of all the special interest tax provisions to the special interests like the oil industry and others. And if you looked at the statement issued yesterday by the co-chairs of the President's task force, they indicated that the Republican budget plan is not a balanced approach because they don't ask the folks at the very highest income levels to help share the sacrifice and the burden going forward. So we're going to have a debate about our priorities and values going forward. And let me close with this. One of the decisions they made in their budget, at the same time they're providing breaks to folks at the very top, was to end Medicare as we know it. They terminate the Medicare guarantee. What does that mean? That means that seniors will be forced to go into the private insurance market. They will bear the entire costs of and risks of the rising health care premiums. And essentially, we will be transferring the payroll taxes for Medicare and the premiums that seniors pay not to the Medicare program anymore, but to the private insurance industry, which will see this as a great bonanza, and seniors will be left to pay the bill of those rising costs in the future. And the result will be you're going to see rationing of health care based on income. You may no longer be able to use your doctor because your doctor may not be in the private plan that you can purchase. So this is a radical change, and we will fight that as well as the provisions they have to simply send a blank check to governors with taxpayer Medicaid money so governors can have free license to fund their own pet initiatives while they can end support to seniors on nursing homes, disabled individuals, and low-income kids. Those are the wrong choices. We shouldn't be providing these big breaks for millionaires and special interests while we're ending those important investments and ending our commitments to seniors.
Thank you, Chris. I'd just like to read from the Congressional Budget Office just to summarize what they had to say to underscore what the Chairman has just reviewed. From the Congressional Budget Office letter to Ryan, under the proposal, most elderly people would pay more for their health care than they would pay under the current Medicare system. Even with additional flexibility, however, the large projected reductions in payments would probably require states to decrease payments to Medicaid providers, reduce eligibility for Medicaid, provide less extensive coverage to beneficiaries, or pay more themselves than would be under the case of the current law. In short, seniors pay more and poor folks will get less. At a time in this nation where there is unprecedented wealth, it's unconscionable to put forward a proposal, especially when everyone understands the problem, knows it's solvable, is prepared to reach out to one another. Democrats understand that we have to make specific cuts and have offered them. We also, as Chris has said, understand that we have to grow this economy and have put forward a bold agenda in conjunction with the president to do so. But how in this equation can the other side, who would agree with us on growing the economy and certainly agrees that there has to be cuts, how can they ignore the fact completely that the other leg on the stool is that when there are those amongst us who are making unprecedented wealth in this nation, that its taxes have got to be on the table as well. There is a path forward here. It is called compromise. They do not want to compromise. They only want it one way. They want to shrink government up so small they can drown it in a bathtub. Who are they drowning? The troops abroad, the veterans, the children, the elderly. That's what's wrong with that budget. The Democrats will put forward a budget based on our values and how we feel we must lead this nation forward. Thank you so much.
The measure that's currently funding the government set to expire in 2 days, what do you guys see as the path forward on that? Is it more likely there will be a long-term budget solution by then, or do you think that a stopgap might be necessary?
The president continues to reach out to the other side, but you can see that his patience is wearing very thin. He's like the adult in the room, so to speak, during this negotiation between an internal discussion in the Republican Party between their leadership and the Tea Party. That's what's preventing this from moving forward. We hope there's no one on this side who wants to see government shut down. Not at all. Not the president, not the Senate, not the House Democrats. So the ball is squarely in the corner of the Republicans.
Would any of you be prepared to vote for a stopgap if that's necessary?
The devil is in the details. If this continues to be death by 1,000 slashes, where you continue to just say we're going to make these cuts, and but more are coming, and we're not going to budge at all, and just try to cut our way to a point into oblivion where we continue to hurt people, you have to see the details first, what their proposal is.
Sir, have y'all been whipping against any kind of bill that would have policy riders like the Title X, like the Planned Parenthood riders that were in H.R. 1? Have you been saying, let's get together in the caucus and we're not going to vote for this?
Well, we understand after all the negotiations, after there had been agreement, as the chairman said, and then they moved the goalposts again, that in addition to moving the goalposts, they also said, oh, and by the way, all the riders are essential as well in order for us to be on this bill. That simply won't fly in the House Select.
Just on that point, because it shows very clearly that the agenda of the House Republicans is to use the deficit as a vehicle to impose their social agenda on the country, because they're insisting that you cut it their way. They're insisting that no longer can any funds go to family planning organizations. They're insisting that you cut education instead of cut subsidies for the oil industry. So it's very clear that they have decided to use this as a vehicle simply to impose their social agenda, not for deficit reduction purposes.
Thank you.
Is